since the 1970s, we've been developing more and more this body of science with the technology, more and more sophisticated technology through the years. And my eternal question is, what's the reason that we're not implementing it more in everything that we do? Now, in 2019, we have a study about metacognition in schools and the impact and the effectiveness of teaching metacognition in schools. And in fact, there are 3 ways of interpreting metacognition. We've got the first is self-regulated learning, improving cognitive thinking skills, and definitely learning how to learn. Those were the key questions that were infused into the learning process. And it did actually lead to better performance, better results, and greater motivation. So definitely has an impact. And who was it impacting? Primary to university students, plus students with learning difficulties. So yes, it really does have an impact when we start to talk to people about their brain, talk to people about how to learn, and also how to enhance learning and how to enhance thinking. Now, what can we do? Well, we can change the way that we talk. We can talk about the brain. We can understand how to stimulate, and we can also understand how to promote learner autonomy. And that's exactly what we're going to just come into a little bit of these. So the way that we communicate, if we change the way that we communicate, it does have an impact. Words have an impact. The way that we ask questions has an impact. How we listen, how we communicate with compassion, how we give feedback, and even how we retain the calm in the learning process. Everything does have an implication. When we look at the neuroscience of words, we can definitely see that the choice of words can actually influence the genes that regulate physical and emotional stress. And even positive, optimistic words are changing the way that we are using and connecting, because it can definitely stimulate prefrontal cortex activity, which in turn is connecting and stimulating motor cortex, and in turn may then affect other areas of the brain. So even through the choice of words, that's going to have an effect. And I always say, you know, as teachers, we're not aware of the patterns that we're in. Often we're very directive. Do this, do that, repeat this, say this. Being directive can have a direct effect on the emotional brain of the learner, and it really can trigger fight or flight if people don't like to be told what to do, if they don't want to be told what to do. So how we really communicate can also be triggering, and we have to understand how to change that. We can become conscious of the way that we speak. We can also understand how to use permission instead of directives. So may I ask you to do this? May I ask you to repeat? Instead of those imperatives all the time. We can also think about how to get them into a reward state, how to demonstrate that we're listening, reformulation, how to bring in questions that are going to evoke curiosity. Curiosity evokes reward state. And even how we are acknowledging and recognizing and choosing the right words. So that, for me, is the first step as educators. Secondly, coming into talking about the brain with learners. And when I say this, I always think that we need to understand how to keep it simple. If we're with children, if we're with teenagers, if we're with adults, how do we express what is happening in the brain? For example, talking about neuroplasticity, the fact that the brain can change. There was one study back in 2008, I believe it was, and Carol Dweck, the lady who wrote the book Mindset, Growth Mindset, she was involved in this study. And they gave the information to one group of children that, yes, the brain is plastic, the brain can change, yes, they can learn. And that particular group, over 2 years, had a better trajectory of grades, a better result than other groups that were not given that information. So just by sharing with our learners about their brain can have a great impact. So talking about neuroplasticity, talking about fight or flight, what triggers us, and each and every one of us, we're different. So understanding what triggers the learner or the group of learners that I have in front of me and talking them through what's happening, helping them to understand that when we go into that fight or flight, then actually the body is preparing to survive. And if we're in a learning process, the areas that we need for learning, the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, may not be fully functioning. They may be depleted of resources because we've gone into a survive mode. So understanding how to explain that to learners, how to get them to realize when they're going into that fight or flight, and then how to understand how to coach them with calm coaching conversations to get them back into a learning state is key if we really want them to learn. We know that psychological safety is necessary. We have research demonstrating, for example, in mathematics, just how anxious people become with mathematics can actually diminish working memory capacity, diminish the attention and the prefrontal cortex functions. And even thinking about doing mathematics can arouse the pain areas of the brain. So psychological safety is a must. And as educators, understanding the difference between implicit learning, explicit learning, really understanding what is the conscious learning about data, information, theory, and what is the subconscious passive input, and how in a language learning process can we be talking about both? Can we be provoking both types of learning and helping the learners to understand, they also can distinguish between explicit and implicit learning. Knowing that also brainwaves play a major part in brain activity and understanding how to bring in the beta brainwaves, the one where we really want that prefrontal cortex executive functions kicking in, and also how to understand when to get into the more relaxed brainwaves like the alpha and the theta to help that subconscious input coming in. Interestingly, the research from 2006, even 2003, we know that a lot of our learning does actually take place at the subconscious level. So what are we doing to help our learners to also understand that, especially with language learning? Another thing that we should be aware of is the chemistry, the brain chemistry, and also the impact of positive emotions. Emotions are how we create those memories. The brain chemistry are very much influenced by the emotions and the impact of the emotions in the learning process. Knowing that dopamine, when we're learning by association, dopamine is essential because it's one of those binding neurotransmitters that really, when we have more dopamine in the brain when we're learning in the prefrontal cortex, we're making more connections per second. How can we get more dopamine in the brain? Well, again, this is key for us to understand. Creating that reward status, creating curiosity, absolutely taking advantage of variety, novelty, fun, keeping it alive, even bringing in positive acknowledgement can also be bringing in that dopamine boost. And emotions are key for learning. We know that the brain loves real, loves personal, making it relevant all the time. So those are just some key points relating to the neuroscience that, you know, as educators, we should be understanding and bringing into that learning process. How to stimulate the cognitive skills? Well, there we need to understand how the brain is a connection machine. The brain is constantly associating. And in 2016, we had the research from the University of Nijmegen in Holland that demonstrates that when we learn a new language, our brain is going to the native grammar areas first. So the brain is trying to springboard, to scaffold from native language. How can we help as educators of languages to provoke and stimulate? And I always say that we have to become the provocateur par excellence, helping them to make those connections. And finally, how to help them to learn how to learn, how to understand their own autonomy and how to provoke what works for them. No two brains are the same. We're all different. We all interpret the world in different ways. We all maybe learn in different ways. And the key is to help our learner to understand how they learn. So having that conversation, helping them to understand that, yes, we have to get it more real, we have to get it more personal, we have to break it down, we have to think about spacing techniques, we have to think about how can we bring in certainty, how can we get their focus and attention in the right place, and how can we get them creating patterns.
Rachel, 5 more minutes.
Thank you. Learning styles as well. Should we have a conversation with our learners about learning styles? I always think it's key to ask our learners, what do they know about how they learn best? Now, all of that, we can then use coaching as that springboard. And a lot of people think that coaching is about being a sports coach. Well, actually, it's not. For me, coaching is about being a soundboard, being a stimulator, a provocateur, as I said before. We're talking about an approach where we're not telling our learners what to do. We're trying to get them to find their own way. We're trying to get them to set their own goals, set their own actions. And yes, we are going to be helping them transfer the knowledge. We're transferring our expertise and our language knowledge to them, but we're trying to do it in such a way that they are getting it instantly. Through these coaching conversations, it changes the dynamic. We're going to be looking at their motivation. We're definitely going to be looking at their goals and getting them to set their own goals. By the way, from the research, we know that when people set their own goals, they're much more likely to achieve them than when they are told what to do. When they get to set the goals, we then get into periodic goal reviews, so they always have a time focus to work with. And we get them to set their own activities. What do they want to do? How do they want to do it? Just to let you know, I've got one of my cats here in the background who is wanting to come up and join the presentation with us. So forgive me while he joins us. So they set their own goals, they set their own actions, and we get them into coaching conversations with vision, with compassion. How can we help? What do you need? Where can we get you to, how can we get you to a different level? So coaching with compassion is definitely the key. Now, I know that we're running out of time, so I'm just going to scroll through a little bit. One thing as a teacher, a quick sort of hint that we often think that as teachers we are being empathetic. We are very empathetic, but it's always about going from empathy to compassion. So when somebody says, I can't do this, I don't feel good about this, it's not about persuading them otherwise. It's really about acknowledging, I'm sorry that you're not feeling good here. What do we need to do to help you feel better? How can we help you to learn this? And moving into compassionate conversations. So effective coaching, vision, getting them to cope with that learning situation, getting them to cope with their stress, their emotional triggers, getting them into that positive, I'm going to say positive focus of learning, and using coaching conversations around emotional triggers to troubleshoot learning problems, and also coaching conversations to help them to learn how to learn. So this is where we're bringing in both the neuroscience and the coaching to create
One more minute, Rachel.
The way forward with neurolanguage coaching. Now, as a neurolanguage coach, we really understand the emotional brain, the social pain that is experienced in the brain as well. We understand the difference between explicit, implicit. We go into flow states of learning. We understand about certainty, psychological safety, what I call the perfect learning state, helping learners to coach them around issues, and how to connect, how to provoke those brain connections, and also how to have grammar conversations with no stress at all. So during language coaching, we do have definite goal setting processes. We have definite patterns of conversation through grammar, and everything that we do is following the research from the neuroscience. So thank you very much, Concepcion. I'm going to close with just a little bit of information there about where people can contact me if they want to. And at that point, I'm going to say thank you and let you take over.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rachel. Very, very interesting and very relevant information to all of us, regardless of the subject matter that we may be teaching. So now we're going to open the floor to the audience for any questions or remarks that the audience may have. I'm looking at the chat, that you're also welcome to open your mic and directly pose your question or make your remark for Rachel.
And my apologies that the cat joined us.
Oh, that is wonderful. And it's very much in tune with what you have been saying, because I've been reading lately that cats have this power to calm people down and to bring the best out of people. So it ties with all these positive emotions that are so important to for the learning process to happen. So we have comments here. You probably are seeing these comments, Rachel. Thank you, Rachel. Very illuminating. Yep. Okay.
Yes, thank you. Mateo, where do you have that question there? So do I need to find the question on, is there a question and answers? And